Welcome again, everyone, to our session today, Teaching Artificial Intelligence Literacy. We are so glad to have you all here with us today. My name is Jane Hammonds, and I am an associate professor in the university libraries at Ohio State. I am the Teaching and Learning Engagement Librarian, and you can email me at hammonds.73@osu.edu. And I'm super excited to be joined here today by my colleague, Michael. So I'll allow him to introduce himself.
Hi there, Michael Floral, Associate Professor and Student Learning Librarian at Ohio State University Libraries and AI Obsessive.
So this workshop definitely would not be possible without Michael's contribution. He is the AI guy in the libraries, and I'm always so grateful every time I say, Michael, do you want to do something on AI? He's always like, yes. So it is fantastic to have him here with us today. So what we're going to do, we're going to talk some about how AI is transforming the information landscape. Then we're going to think more specifically about what we mean when we talk about artificial intelligence literacy. What is that? What are the competencies or the skills or the beliefs that might be associated with AI literacy? And then we'll think about some strategies and resources that we might have for helping students to develop their AI literacy. That last sentence should have been develop AI literacy instead of develop AI resources. So sorry, that was unclear there. All right, so we do have a poll to get us started. So we wanted to get an idea of how folks are actually using AI. So we want to have a question about whether you're using AI in your own teaching practices. So, if you're using AI to design assignments or, to help with grading or anything like that, if you're using AI for your own teaching practices, we'd like to hear that. We'd like to hear if you're requiring or allowing students to use AI in your courses or your own instruction sessions. And if you're teaching students the skills and competencies associated with AI literacy. So we're going to go ahead and launch that as a poll. Right, so hopefully let me get this up here and launch. All right, hopefully folks should be seeing the poll now. So we'll give everyone a chance to share their responses there. So are you using AI tools in your teaching? Are you requiring or allowing students to use AI? And then are you teaching skills or concepts associated with AI literacy? We have about 65% participation. We'll give it a few more seconds for those folks that would like to respond. It does look like responses are slowing down a little bit. We're up to about 75%. So I think that we will go ahead and end the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so hopefully everyone should be seeing the results. So it looks like in terms of using AI in the teaching practices, most folks are fairly rarely or not at all doing that. Only a fairly small percentage, about 8%, that are regularly using AI tools in their teaching practices. In terms of requiring students to use, only about 4% are currently requiring students to use, but more than half are allowing students to use. And then about the other half almost, so we've got almost a split between the allow and the not allow to use there. And then the last one, are you teaching the skills or concepts associated with AI literacy? About 43% say yes, about 32% say no, and about 25% aren't sure. And so we'll talk more about what it actually means to be teaching AI literacy as we're going forward. I'm going to stop sharing that. I'm going to close that poll. All right, hopefully we should be back to the slides. If ever I'm saying something that doesn't seem to align with what we're doing, please let me know. So we're going to talk a little bit about how artificial intelligence is transforming the information landscape. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Michael to talk about this.
Great, thanks, Jane. Excuse me. Let's talk about information literacy first, since we're talking about AI and information literacy. And one common way to approach information literacy is as a landscape. So you could think of it not as a singular thing, a checkbox, the student is information literate or not. Rather, it encompasses a broad set of abilities. And I think a story might perhaps, I'm not going to read this at you. A story might provide a good example of this. For a grant, I was working with nursing faculty this past year, and it was a community health class. The students were asked to visualize information and provide education resources for local communities related to COVID-19. And a lot of students used New York Times, Washington Post, federal data, and they all kind of patted themselves on the back in these student reflections, which is great. But the instructor actually was really disappointed. And we had an opportunity to ask them why. And they said, this will not be persuasive to certain people in certain populations. And they knew that from experience. They needed local county level data to be able to aggregate that and present that out to people at a county level, not the New York Times, not the Washington Post, not federal data. So for me, that kind of gets at the level of sophistication both instructors are asking students, but also students need in order to manage this. And guess what? In a different course, there's going to be different. New York Times will be gold standard and it will never be critically evaluated. And so this information literacy, you can think of it as this broad landscape in which, depending on where you're at, depending on the context, the time, the discipline, etc., it will change. And so information literacy is not necessarily a singular thing. It's really kind of this broad environment in which students interact with information in different ways at different times. I think the next slide, Jane, thank you. Yep, and there it is. So it's conceptual understandings. Yes, it's skills. You have to be able to navigate certain information resources. It's also habits. You could also research it as an experience. So this is really a broad concept involving multiple facets, multiple dimensions, multiple perspectives. So we're approaching this, and generally the field of library information science is approaching information literacy more contextually, in more disciplinary specific contexts, more contextual, so on and so forth. Okay, so now we'll throw it back to you one more time. How has AI transformed the AI landscape for students, and what are the new challenges they face in this new AI world we live in? From your perspective, what is changed, and how do we have to navigate this new information landscape?
And we're going to do this as a Jamboard. So the link to the Jamboard is in the chat. So you should be able to access that. I know Jamboard is going away, but we are just using it until the end. So if you haven't used Jamboard before, hopefully everyone should be seeing the Jamboard there. The easiest way to add a response is to go over on the left-hand side, and you have an option to add a sticky note. You can click that sticky note option, type your response in there, and post your response to the Jamboard.
Looks like we have a problem, Jane.
Oh, that's okay.
This is too popular.
Yeah, we'll ask you then to just go ahead and share your response in the chat. You would like to do that. So go ahead and share the response in the chat. We'll just do that. All right, so here are questions. We'll go back here so folks can see those. So how has AI transformed the information landscape, and what new challenges are students facing? I did see one comment come in about integrity, but yeah, we'll give folks a chance to share the responses there.
I'm seeing a lot of ethical use, which is fascinating, and I think that's wholly appropriate, and it needs to be discussed. Also, someone said like summarizing information for students, which I think is related to the ethics. Also, you have to wonder too, to what degree is it summarizing? There's PDF, ChatGPT PDF or something, which alleges to summarize. information for you, but it summarizes differently from other types of compute. And the question is it trustworthy? Can you trust it? Have you put your own research into it, asked it to summarize it? I did, and I wasn't too happy with the results, I'll be honest. I felt a lot of nuance was lost. Bias is another one. No one gets a tool and not a panacea. Maggie, like right on, you got a gold star today. Jane was wrong. You are all being tested, and most of you are succeeding. So good for you. Yeah, people can, there's hallucination, not learning the information, just learning how to find it. That's an excellent point. I think as educators, we're here to help students develop their own process of learning. We can't just, we're here to teach people to fish, not give them fish necessarily. How to vet information. And then earlier someone said generative AI and other types of AI applications are becoming more embedded. So Grammarly is a common one I know, where there's more previously there wasn't generative AI in there, and now there kind of is, and it's unclear, it's murky to what degree or how much, and students may not simply just be familiar or understand how much of it is in there and what is the appropriate ethical line in terms of academic misconduct, authorship, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, we'll need to move on, but I think this is, laziness and critical thinking. That's a very good one too. I think this is excellent evidence of the diversity of the sheer number of issues this raises, right? So we're trying to educate students. Again, part of our mission, I just learned like the motto of OSU is like learning for citizenship or something like that. Someone could correct me, I'm sorry. But we're educating the next generation of democratic citizens. That is part of our job as educators here at OSU or elsewhere, very likely. And so the question becomes like, how do we get to help students navigate this new information environment in which there's serious ethical challenges that is changing more rapidly than ever before, and that may fundamentally alter the existing information landscape in ways we can't even predict yet. So I think everything, education for citizens, thank you all, thank you. I will try to memorize that. And I will not attempt to dust off my Latin either. So thank you all. I think that demonstrates the sophistication there. Okay, so I'm just going to go through a couple quick studies here. Shout out, Corey. Thank you for the smiling emoji. Couple quick studies. This is something more recent, published in July. There was students interacted with a base version of ChatGPT and a tutor version, and they saw an increase in performance, which sounds great. But as soon as that was taken away, the performance was lost. And so ultimately, actually, excuse me, they performed worse than students who never had access. So that's evidence of the lack of critical thinking, I think, that some folks are worried about, that students would use that as a crutch. There's emerging research to demonstrate that, yes, this is a very real possibility with existing AI technology. And then I said this, I've been saying this for a long time, that, hey, wow, ChatGPT 4 passed the like universal bar exam or some type of equivalent, and the United States medical licensing examination as evidence of the how great ChatGPT 4 is and how clever and its reasoning and thinking abilities. But now there's some emerging research demonstrating or calling to question data contamination, such that basically it had the answers, or on the right-hand side, you could say, like, did it simply memorize the answers? And there's increasing evidence. There's no hard evidence per se, but there's increasing evidence that some of this performance might not have been a result of the model's capabilities, but as a result of functionally being trained on that data already. It's called data contamination, and it is a problem. So just throwing another wrench in the complexity of the information landscape. Also, another newer study with an AI, certain people were found to be more creative, but the collective creativity of a group was actually reduced. So individuals felt more creative, but there's a collective organization problem there, a collective action problem, where individuals might feel more empowered using it, but collectively, as a result of its stochastic, probabilistic, approach to computation, it averages things out on the whole. And so the diversity of the group is reduced. That's another thing to consider. Stephen asks, isn't it essentially kind of regression to the mean? Yeah, you can argue that current models are functionally a type of linear regression analysis. Now it's way more complicated than that, but in one sense, yes. And then I think this is like the second to last point. There's also questions about the data being used to train these models. It's not basically only one smaller, lesser known model, from my understanding, has given away the data that these models were trained on. And so there's not transparency, there's not consent, there's whole issues around privacy, bias, copyright infringement for the data these models were trained on. And that's something I think students in particular should want to question, should want to interrogate. It's not just using the tool and are you proficient at it? If we do think that's important, but also where do these models come from? What data were they trained on? You know, did it violate copyright? Did it, does this, was it trained on a biased data set, so on and so forth? That's kind of an emerging data authenticity and provenance are kind of emerging ethical issues. And again, I think a useful way for students to approach this. And so let's go back to this information landscape. Here's a tweet from Gary Marcus, a great critic, I think, of generative AI technology. And he noted, look, the top Google result on Google was an AI knockoff of an original. Like, is that a problem? You might say, if you think of the internet as part of this huge information ecosystem or landscape, then yes. And so I think the next, do we have a poll in there about that next? Yeah. So imagine a scenario in which not just text, but image, audio, video, the majority of the internet is AI generated. How would we have to teach students differently? Would that fundamentally change learning in higher education? Would it change how you approach teaching? Would it change how you do your research or you do your everyday job? That's something to consider. And so, yeah, so now we're at the Q&A portion. So I guess in the chat, is that right, Jane?
Yeah, so they can put questions in the chat or in the Q&A, either one.
Yeah, great.
Diana actually has a great comment in there about my mind struggles with the concept of AI use as a crutch when we're not sure where education and learning in general is going. So I'm sure we thought computers were a crutch until we found a purpose and approach to using it as a tool.
Excellent.
So
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think there's absolutely ways to use generative AI in educationally purposeful ways, but this is an emerging technology. And I think in particular, there's lots of opportunities to engage with students about the complexities involved, the ethical issues involved, intellectual property, data provenance, creativity. What does it mean to use an AI to help you generate emails consistently or to create thumbnails? Like, is something lost or not? That's obviously an open discussion. And I think we ideally want students to come to an informed perspective on that, which requires engagement, discussion, reflection.
we have other questions for Michael. We did have a question in the Q&A about is whoever vets AI for your university also considering non-generative AI options that are being integrated into certain library databases that your students may have access to? For example, JSTOR text analyzer. I'm not sure, Michael, if you have any comments to that. That's a little bit outside of my particular area.
I don't know. All I know is that publishers are rushing to put in their own generative AI work, their own generative AI systems natively into their databases as a way. So like you pull up a JSTOR article and then you can query it. You can query that PDF. You can ask it to summarize points, et cetera, et cetera. From my perspective, a lot of those have a code of paint, and then a ChatGPT 4. It's just making API calls. It's just querying ChatGPT, Claude, whatever, but usually ChatGPT from my experience. Maybe they have their own instance of like an open source AI like Llama, Google's Gemma just came out and it's pretty good for like a smaller model. It's showing significant improvements. So the short answer is I'm not aware of that, but my expectation would be these models become smaller. Those smaller models would be aimed towards more specific tasks. And so I wouldn't be surprised, and cheaper, by the way. And therefore, it would make sense that they will be embedded more and more into information resources like databases.
And we had one more question in the Q&A, and then I think we probably will need to move on. So
Yeah.
my universe is pushing Google Gemini, but I have heard it is less reliable. What is your experience? Are there any tools that are more reliable than others?
It depends on the day. Like that Google, the AI I just mentioned, that just happened like yesterday, and it shot up there are ranking boards or leaderboards where you can go to a website. I can post it in the chat after this, where you don't know which models are being used. It gives you two outputs and you say, I like A over B or B over A. So there's like type of like community-driven leaderboards. So that's some evidence of some models being quote unquote more reliable or better. But that's a whole open question of, like I brought up in that one slide, it's a whole open question about how do we measure the efficacy or reliability of these systems. You'll hear a lot of talk of benchmarking, but I think from a scholarly perspective, usually from your own discipline, you're going to have your own perspective on this, and you probably aren't going to want to rely on benchmarks that may or may not, involve data contamination of the models. So long story short is maybe you'll have to test it yourself. And even then, you can't be sure of how this generative AI model will behave in the future. So it's a big open question. And we have more questions than time. Boy, I would love to
Yeah.
take the next 2 hours, but I'm sure we'll have to move on, Jane.
Yeah. One thing I did want to point out, though, it's really interesting. So folks are in the chat are searching for the right comparison. Someone raised calculators. Another folks like, no, it's the introduction of the internet. Some folks are comparing it to Wikipedia. Do you have a sense, Michael, of what level that you would put this at of those kind of options?
Yeah, I actually have a whole shtick about I'm reticent to make analogies because in its very nature, they're going to be fundamentally different, right? I would trust a calculator with my life to calculate 2 times 4 correctly or 100 times 320. I would not, you can ask an AI how many R's are in the word strawberry, and it will get it wrong, more likely than not. So yeah, I'm reticent because they're so fundamentally different. I would just say this, for me, this feels like kind of like early internet age where we still haven't kind of wrapped our head around it. There's not a lot of infrastructure around generative AI. But I genuinely hesitate to use analogy because for me, it's something easy. It's something easy to wrap your head around. Oh, it's like X, it's like Y. But I think also generative AI is fundamentally different. It's so different from other types of compute that I think I'd rather not try to make an analogy. I'd rather kind of try to treat it as its own thing and kind of leave that tension in place because there's a lot we still don't know. So I know that's unsatisfying, but there is a really good book about AI and analogy. I'll link to it too. That's kind of informed my opinion. I think it's called God, Animal, Human, Machine.
Mhm. All right. So now we have this background context. We talked a little bit about what information literacy is. We talked a little bit about how AI is transforming the information landscape. Then the question becomes, is AI literacy something different? Is AI literacy part of information literacy? Is it distinct from information literacy? Are there specific aspects related to AI that are different in terms of how we think about teaching students how to research, how to use information, how to search for information? So instead of trying to use the Jamboard, since that didn't work last time, if folks wanted to share in the chat, how you with this background in mind, how would you define AI literacy? What does it mean for a student to be developing their AI literacy? What do you see as the key or crucial skills, dispositions, conceptual understandings and whether or not you see that as being distinct from being information literate more broadly. So I'd love to just see some of the responses that folks might have about what constitutes AI literacy. So the ability to use AI safely and ethically, how to apply it in a real world environment. Prompt engineering is a huge skill in AI literacy. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, several folks are mentioning prompts. AI involves a level of technological literacy and skill beyond just information literacy. So beyond how it is created to understand its biases. Knowing when to use and how to evaluate it's correct. So it's the same skill as evaluating if a source is reliable. General idea of the types and how they work. Checking the output. Understanding its responsible use, aware of its limitations, knowledge of ethical and environmental concerns. Can you trust the source? Yeah, AI literacy can really, harder. I think this is deeper than IL in general, which is predicated on the idea of subjective and unique knowledge. We've moved beyond that. Response. Integrity, dispositions. Yes, integrity, discernment. Excellence, absolutely. Credibility and ethical reflection. Yeah, writing affirmative prompts, keywords still matter. Yeah. So I don't think, we're not going to solve the question that some librarians have been talking about whether AI literacy is part of information literacy, if it's distinct from. That's not the goal today. But the goal is just to kind of think about this in the context of information literacy and what it might mean to actually teach AI literacy. I'm going to share a few different examples of definitions or frameworks for AI literacy that have been developed. These are by no means the only ones that are out there, and this is not a settled discussion. So people are continually proposing new ideas and new understandings of what AI literacy might entail. This is not something that everyone has coalesced around a single answer, but that was also the same and continues to be the same for information literacy as well. Of course, there's always been multiple definitions and frameworks of information literacy as well. A few of the examples that I wanted to share. So this was from an article that was written actually even before ChatGPT really became a thing, talking about what AI literacy is and design. Again, kind of similar, having this as this set of competencies, this broader range of competencies that allow individuals to critically evaluate AI tools, to communicate, to use those tools effectively, to collaborate with those tools. And they highlighted 5 questions really that are related to this. So that students would need to understand what AI is. They would need to understand what AI can do, how it works, how it should be used, and how people think about AI. So getting to that idea of understanding that AI is not actually a person, right? So that's one definition. MLA has come out with a student guide to AI literacy. And this is what they highlighted as the key aspects of AI literacy. So having, again, that basic understanding, being familiar with the policies for AI use at their institution as part of this, knowing how to prompt AI. So we had a lot of comments in the chat about how prompt engineering was an important part of being AI literate. Being able to evaluate the relevance, usefulness, and accuracy. And that was also highly seen in the comments that evaluation is a really key part of this. Monitoring your own learning as you use AI tools, recognizing that Gen AI is fundamentally different from humans, and then understanding the potential harms of Gen AI. And one of the things I thought as I was reading this and looking at this example is, obviously, I think that identifying harms is important, but they actually don't talk about understanding the benefits as well, which I think would be really interesting to think about and add a word into that as well. Another example there. And then this was published fairly recently in EDUCAUSE, and this was an AI literacy framework that was developed by some folks at Barnard University, I believe, where they highlight 4 different levels of AI literacy. So at that first basic level is just understanding AI. So knowing what these terms mean, what artificial intelligence is, machine learning, and having some understanding of the basic benefits and limitations of AI tools. So that's that foundational level. Then the next level up is that being able to apply and use AI tools. So to effectively use an AI tool to be able to get some desired result that you are having. And they also include that level of prompt, being able to prompt AI tools effectively. Then moving up another level, they talk about this is where we get into those ethical questions and being able to understand and analyze AI within the broader society that we're living in, the context that we're living in. Think about how they might be able to use AI in their discipline or field. Being aware of the criticisms or the critiques that have been raised around AI. And then they have this final level of being able to create AI or to create new ideas and technologies or structures related to AI. Those are a few examples of different AI literacy frameworks. So I'd love to hear if there are anything in those definitions that really resonated with you, anything that you see that might be missing from any of those descriptions or definitions, or how you see these definitions as being distinct from or related to those definitions of information literacy. So love to hear your response that anyone would like to share to any of those literacies. So we have, I like EDUCAUSE because of Bloom's taxonomy. Like the idea of a framework. Larry shared, seems important to understand how using AI impacts our cognition. That's a great point, Larry. Yeah. Beth shared, let's see, I'm concerned. So fast with preserving the integrity of student learning, impact on learning, consequences of cognitive offload, impact on brain function. Yeah. So that's a great point, Ruth. And I was wondering if anybody was going to bring that up, the question of, I don't think that creating AI should be required of the framework. It takes out the ability for individuals to be AI literate and object to its usage. I was actually going to see if was interested if anybody would bring up the point of whether creating AI, and obviously that was like the top tier of that framework, but whether we really think that creating AI is necessary to be AI literate. I don't know if any of us would say that being able to build our own computer is the same as computer literacy or required to be considered computer literate. So it'd be interesting to see, is being able to create AI required for being AI literate? Yeah, actually, I can't make a calculator components, but I've used one for many years. Yes. Yeah. So it seems like, yeah, a lot of folks are kind of agreeing with this idea that it doesn't necessarily, being able to create AI may not necessarily be a part of AI literacy or a necessary part of AI literacy.
Jen, can I push back on this, like just very small?
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe not create AI, but what about advocating for certain types of AI or certain aspects of AI, say to be explainable or reliable or human-centered or something like that. I think for me, that's what I get from the create AI category, not be able to like tweak models and use Python scripts and all that, but like, could you at least advocate for certain types of AI? Or hell, just say like AI is evil and it shouldn't exist, whatever.
Yeah, that's a great point, Michael. And yeah, Bill had asked the question in there. So what does that actually mean? So maybe that's something we need to interrogate more, is what exactly it means to create AI. Does that actually mean you're building the module yourself, or is it something else? Yeah, that's a great point. And I actually would have to go back and read that article again because I may have misinterpreted what they are talking about. So please feel free to take a look at that article. And if I totally misinterpreted that, that is totally fine. Because yeah, this is something that we're still all learning ourselves as part of this. Yeah, cool. So I would also love to hear if anyone has any thoughts, if kind of hearing these definitions, hearing what Michael was talking about in terms of the way AI is transforming the landscape, what that means for how you think about your own role in teaching AI literacy. And I know we have instructors here, we have instructional support folks, we have librarians. Um, does hearing about this and thinking about this change how you think about your own role or responsibility in teaching AI literacy? Is it something that you feel responsible for in your role? So I'd love to hear if anyone has any comments around that. We were talking about this a little bit in a meeting that we had the other day, yesterday in the library, about this being one of those things where everybody recognizes that it's really important, but whose responsibility actually is it to teach it? Uh,
And if I can interject too, Brooke has a great point. It's so much to keep on top of
mhm,
when it's changing so quickly.
mhm, mhm,
I just
mhm,
said like yesterday or the day before that like performance is plateaued. And then yesterday I find out that ChatGPT 5 is allegedly releasing end of 2024, beginning of 2025.
mhm,
And that could
mhm.
just be a rumor. Maybe that's true, and there's going to be a whole new explosion of capabilities.
Yeah. So yeah, great comments coming in. So Rob shared, for example, it's hard to know where I would fit it with the list of other course content that I need to get to, which is for now just led me to ban it, which is not realistic. That's a great, it's such a great point. Like where does this fit? We have so much thing that we're already trying to teach, and we were talking about this again in a meeting. Like it's none of our jobs, really. Like who of us has a job that our job is to teach AI literacy? Right. We all are doing other things that we're trying to teach or that we have to do in our job, and yet we recognize that someone needs to be doing this, and so it creates that tension. Um, hmm, so yeah, great responses coming in. Just finding opportunities to engage in conversation like this, but also then Amy has like teaching AI literacy is unavoidably intertwined with many other literacies. Right. That's a great point as well. If we think of this as right? It's part of every other literacy that we're teaching, then it is our responsibility to do this. Yeah, great. I see a struggle around labor. Right. Yes. Um, yeah. Yeah, that's a great comment too about like if we have all of these ethical concerns about AI, then you know, are we obligated to teach something that we have such significant ethical concerns about? Uh, Comments that are coming in. Yeah. Great. Thank you all so much for sharing these comments. So we wanted to share just a few uh, steps or guidelines or things that we think that folks might be able to do to talk about this with their students, but there is no magic cure that we can solve these issues. We don't have enough time to do this. We have all of this other content, but we just wanted to share some ideas or some thoughts around how we might be able to facilitate conversations with our students. And several folks had mentioned this in the chat, and we would just wanted to highlight that we think it's really important that transparency is really key here. Being transparent about your own AI use, being transparent about how you expect to use students to use or not use AI tools in the classroom. Encourage them to be very transparent and reflecting and thinking on how they are using AI tools and having these conversations, and thinking about how we can incorporate and bring student perspectives into the policies that we may be crafting in our classrooms or at our institutions about AI use. So there are a lot of different, we know again, not everyone has time to be able to engage in these kinds of conversations, but there's a lot of different ways that you could talk about AI with students that you might be able to connect to things that you're talking about. So, talking about privacy, security, there were comments, lots of comments always about academic integrity. So talking to students about what acceptable or unacceptable or uncertain uses of AI tools with might be in terms of academic integrity, talking with students about the issues of bias, about accessibility, how they are using AI tools or how they may use AI tools or to create a more accessible environment for everyone. And then, of course, the environmental impacts that have been mentioned several times. So there's a lot of different types of conversations that you could have with students about AI. It's not necessarily that you're going to just sit down with students and have one conversation about AI and talk about everything and that's going to be over. But there's a lot of ways that you could bring AI into conversations or issues that you might be having with your students in other areas. You know, if you are teaching in a particular discipline, a great way is to think about, you know, how instructors in the field are using AI to teach. So you can, you know, share examples of here's how other instructors are using AI in the classroom. You know, how would we think this would work in our particular classroom? Sharing examples of how professionals or, you know, practitioners in your field are using AI as part of your work. I think that could lead to a lot of great discussions, right? So social workers using AIs, you know, those in criminal justice using AI, lawyers, whatever disciplinary field you're in, there's someone who is using AI in your field and talking about what the ethical concerns might be of having AI develop your patient plan for or a client plan for someone that you're working with. Are there ethical concerns about that? So you know, you can bring it to the level of thinking about AI in your discipline. And if you're, you know, worried about we don't have time to talk about this, at least bringing it in at this disciplinary level might be a way to really get to some of these issues. As you're thinking about designing assignments using AI tools, if you are planning to do this, really thinking carefully about why you're wanting the students to use AI tools. So it's because you want them to learn how to use a tool? Is it because you want them to understand the limitations or the benefits of the tool? Is it because you're wanting them to think critically about the ethical implications of AI? So again, thinking about how you're wanting them to use that tool, how you're using that tool yourself. Are they using AI tool just to substitute for something that they were already doing? Or is the AI tool actually transforming what you're asking them to do or wanting them to do? So kind of thinking about different levels that you might be asking students to engage with or use AI tools. Again, being very transparent, making it clear to students that if they are allowed to use AI tools, what part of the assignment that they are allowed to use it and what part that they are not. So it's a recommendation. You'll see a lot of places where students are asked to provide like an audit trail. Here's how I used AI. Here's the tool that I used. Here's the prompt that I used. Here's the results that I've gotten. Here's what the changes that I made as a result of that. So again, that we're really highlighting this issue of transparency, but really making it clear, you know, just, you know, not that, oh, AI use is allowed or AI use is not allowed, but what parts of it might be allowed and what parts it might be not. This also gets back to that question of if you are planning to require students to use AI, if they have objections to doing so, are you going to provide them with an alternative assignment or something alternative that they can do? Is it ethically right to require them to use AI tools? And then, you know, if you do have students use AI tools, making sure you provide examples of what good AI use looks like. So what are good prompts that students could use in the class, right? What does an audit trail actually look like so that students know how to, you know what your expectations are. So if folks are familiar with the TILT model, of course, we just went through the 3 stages of the TILT module: purpose, task, and criteria to clarify your design expectations. So I know we're already running rapidly out of time, but we've talked a little bit about this issue already. I'd love to hear if anyone has any thoughts. So we mentioned earlier that the guidance at Ohio State is that you should not require students to use AI tools if they have objections to doing so. We would love to open it up to hear if anyone has any thoughts on the ethics around this issue. Is it ethically wrong to require our students to use AI tools at this point? Or are we failing students if we don't require them to use AI tools? We mentioned, right, none of us would feel good if a student graduated from our university not being able to use a computer. We would think that we had failed them, right? So are we failing students if we are not requiring them to use AI tools? Love to hear comments that folks might have about that. So still too new to require, but encourage definitely.
There's
So we
some
don't
questions.
that's a great point.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Michael.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
There's some questions of like, what would the objections be? I've heard some from students who are creators consider themselves artists, write fiction, et cetera, and they have serious intellectual property concerns. They've put things out on the internet in the spirit of sharing with the world and getting feedback. And they shared with us before generative AI became popular. And now they're learning that their data that they put out, their personal work, is being used to train these models so that these companies can derive a profit from them when they didn't consent to any of this. Now, the AI companies are going to say, there's a transformative use. We just, tweaked this model. We're not stealing your intellectual property. It's fundamentally transformed. But from the student perspective, they think it's not right that their work that they provided to the world in good faith is now being monetized and used to train models without their consent.
Other comments in there, folks are talking about, having students use a tool that might be collecting their data that they are not aware of. The environmental impacts. Some students might have significant concerns about the environmental impacts, right? Yeah, so that's a great question, right? So yeah, is it ethically responsible to learn about history, politics, right? So yeah, it raises some interesting, some interesting issues. And that this is not a question that can solve at all. But it's one that we thought would be an interesting discussion to have, to think about what might be the concerns about requiring students to use AI. Requiring students to create accounts, for sure. Especially if you're using any tools, right? Michael has raised the point, or maybe it was, I don't know who it was, Michael, right? If some students are using AI tools and some students are not, or is their work being evaluated at the same level, right? And so if a student says, I'm not going to use AI tools for whatever reason they have, but another student does and does better or gets a better grade, does that create an equity issue?
And on top of it, there's a big debate now, or an emerging debate, about instructors using AI to grade student work. That's a whole other ball of wax. But yeah, there's equity issues here too.
Yeah. So we just had a few last things as we're kind of wrapping up. Just some potential kind of activities. If you're interested in thinking about just that sort of first level that we talked about in the one model of like helping students to define, you can do kind of things like pre-test, true false statements, matching kind of activities, to get an idea of what students already know. Do they understand these terms? They may understand them better than we do. Maybe they don't, who knows? And there was a lot of comments there about prompts. So I wanted to make sure that I shared some resources here on how to help students develop their ability to prompt. So I wanted to make sure that I shared those with everyone. All right, and just some resources here. All of these have been added into the Padlet. So we've got like 5 minutes left for questions or comments. So let me see if we got some questions in the Q&A. Let's see, I don't see any questions right now. So questions, comments in the chat that folks would like to share, or in the Q&A.
Yeah, there's a question. Will the chat transcript be shared? I think it's $25 a pop. Is that right, Jane?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. We have to make our money back. No. Yes, we'll share everything with everyone. So yeah, you'll get a follow-up email, slides, everything. Yes, will the next session, okay, yeah, great point. So question. So we do have next week, we will have a follow-up session that is going to be on engaging with AI tools. So this is going to be much more hands-on, just getting in there and playing around with the tools. Michael is going to be leading that session. So if you're interested in that, you can go ahead and register. If you're not, so we've got the QR code there. You can register. And again, we'll send a follow-up link there. So that's September 5th next week at 12 o'clock. So we hope to see folks there for that one. And then we have a bunch of follow-up sessions. These are not AI focus sessions, but for just information literacy focus sessions. We got a bunch of follow-up sessions there as well. Basically, we have workshops every week through the end of October. So we'll hopefully see folks at all of those sessions. We'll go back. Yeah, so questions, last questions, comments, thoughts that folks would like to share. Let me see if we got another one in the Q&A. So what questions at OSU library are you fielding about AI literacy?
I could jump in. All of them. Every discipline, each perspective, there's different faculty. I know a faculty member who's creating their own AI based off an open textbook, and they used Llama and they created their own generative AI model, all the way to instructors saying, I don't feel comfortable with students using it because the point of my class, I'm not against AI, the point of my class is to interrogate these texts, and it needs to happen. It's a rough and ready process. Ethical concerns, technical concerns, environmental concerns. I mean, it's all over the board, quite frankly.
Yeah. The
From my
AI
experience.
concerns, of course, the AI, the academic integrity concerns, right? Because we know that it's in our committee on academic misconduct are seeing these cases. And so that's a really big concern as well, of course. Wonderful. So we do have like 2 more minutes in case we do have any questions. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. But we will see if anyone has any lasting comments, questions that they would like to add. Might make a good discussion board in class. Yeah, I think that, students are really looking for guidance. And so, I mean, if you can have these discussions with the students, I think that they will engage. Yes, yes, Missy, absolutely. We're all looking for guidance. Yeah, for sure.
I think that's a great, honestly, like a good point to finish up. Like there's so many things up in the air, and that also provides this tremendous opportunity to engage in students, to model your scholarly inquiry or your critical thinking method for students, and to task them to engage in comparable ways and to model that type of critical behavior. It's okay to not know everything, and it can be really enjoyable to learn something with students.
Yes. Right. Well, thank you all so much, Michael. Thank you so much for being here today. And I know we're all looking forward to the session next week to get a chance to have some fun using AI tools. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Bye, everyone.